You're listening to Author Conversations, a series of interviews with Stenhouse authors about their books, their teaching lives, and their work beyond the classroom. In this podcast, recorded during a very busy IRA conference, Janet Allen describes the philosophy that informed her book Words, 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 and how systematic vocabulary instruction can be achieved without word lists or workbooks.
You know, I think that of all the challenges that I went through in my classroom, one of the most difficult things that I experienced was figuring out what to do about vocabulary instruction. I think at a high school level, vocabulary instruction is a big piece in an English class, and I got all of these mixed messages. I realized very quickly that my students were actually fairly able and willing to sit and copy words up from the dictionary, copy the definitions, and use them in sentences, like the sentence that came to me a couple of years ago from a teacher in Virginia, where a young man wrote that he was lactose and intolerant and so couldn't drink milk. I got hundreds of those sentences over time. And so I knew that my kids, while they were quiet in doing that, I could tell just by their questions that they weren't actually getting anything out of it, because they would say, which meaning do you want? And I would say, the one that makes sense. And they would say, so can I put the shortest one? And so I knew that they weren't actually going to use these words in any way. And sure enough, in their writing, I never saw the words again. Unless it was some word that was vaguely some word that they shouldn't use, then I could hear that one again or see it in writing. But other than that, never saw the words again. And so, in the absence of knowing what to do, I stopped doing anything. I just got rid of all the vocabulary workbooks that were in our school. When I became English department chair, I got rid of them for everybody, and I got rid of them in my own classroom. And I stopped doing anything, any kind of systematic vocabulary instruction, and I used all of that extra time for students to read. And as I said in Words, 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 I don't apologize for that. I think that the research clearly supports that the number one indicator of vocabulary growth and academic achievement is volume of reading. And my students were reading a lot, and they were reading a lot of diverse text, and they were learning a lot of new words. A clear indication of that for me came with when we finished reading The Crucible in my classroom, and one of my students who had a crush on a young man who actually appears in the book, had a crush on him, and she said, you know, Mrs. Allen, I think softly on him from time to time, which of course is a direct line out of The Crucible. Given that these were considered the most at-risk students at the high school, for them to be using this kind of language, it was just another indicator for me that these students just need to be reading more. On the other hand, I also knew that there was truth in what researchers were saying, that some of our students need a lot more direct instruction than other students. Research is also clear that students do need some systematic vocabulary instruction. They don't need workbooks, they don't need programs, but it does need to be systematic, and it can be systematic in three ways. I write about this in Words, Words, Words. I live it in the classrooms today, where I support what's going on for teachers. And initially, students need integration. They need lots of new words, but those words have to be hooked to something they already know if they're going to learn new words. And so that's an easy one for me. I love to read. My students, I eventually love to read. And so we could learn a lot of new words just in the context. My students had a word wall in my high school classroom, which is relatively unusual in high school classrooms. And my students kept portable word walls in their academic journals. So we did that. The second level, I think, is considerably important as well, and that is repetition. Students need to see and hear words in meaningful context. Because I was a firm believer in the use of audio tapes as well as my reading aloud to students every day, my students encountered lots of new words along the way. And then finally, they needed to make sure that they were using words meaningfully. And I think this is where the use of graphic organizers helped so much. It was when, actually in the teaching of vocabulary, was when I first started creating graphic organizers in my classroom, because it was a way for my students to take a word that was relatively abstract for them and then make those personal connections, so they could write down examples of the word as well as non-examples, such as a graphic that I have in Words, 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 word questioning or words in context. Students are writing antonyms, they're writing synonyms, they're writing personal connections to the word, examples and non-examples, and taking the word apart and looking at prefixes and suffixes, but they're able to record all of that. And in the recording of that, students are seeing and hearing the word over and over and over again. As we played with the word, as we added different prefixes to a root or base word, students were learning a lot of new words along the way, such that in the last year that I was teaching, I had a lot of visitors in my classroom who had come to watch what was going on with these kids, and teachers would say, oh, Janet, I think you were confused. I wanted to watch your at-risk students. I wanted to see what you were doing with them, because my students talked more like I talked than they talked the way their peers talked. And so I think in part because I played with vocabulary with them a lot, so every week I would decide to use a new vocabulary word with them or a pair of words. So when kids would come in and say, Mrs. Allen, do you have a pencil I can borrow? I would say, you know what, I have a plethora of pencils today, so I'm happy to lend you one. But the next day, when they had stolen all the pencils the day before, they'd say, Miss Allen, do you have pencils today? And I'd say, you know, yesterday when I had a plethora of pencils, I was happy to give you one, but today I have a dearth of pencils. No pencils to give out today. Kids would say, she got pencils up there? No, she's talking about dirt or something. She doesn't have any pencils for us. So it was that kind of playing with language. I love words. It was that kind of playing with language that I did with my students. But I was systematic in connecting the words we were learning to the work we were doing together. In our reading workshop, in our writing workshop, in the creative arts pieces that we did, we always used the vocabulary words along the way. Once I started doing exit slips in my classroom, my students used whatever our word of the day was in the exit slip at the end of each class, so that they could use it right away, and I could tell if they had gotten the multiple uses for that word along the way.
If you'd like to learn more about Janet Allen's work, including Words, visit our site at www.stenhouse.com or contact your local distributor. Thanks for listening.